The definition of a fairy story, what it is or what it should be, does not then depend on any definition or historical account of elf or fairy, but upon the nature of fairy, the perilous realm itself, and the air that blows in that country. I will not attempt to define that, nor to describe it directly. It cannot be done. Fairy cannot be caught in a net of words, for it is one of its qualities to be indescribable, though not imperceptible. It has many ingredients, but analysis will not necessarily discover the secret of the whole. Welcome to Shire Reckoning. I'm Alistair Stevens. Our opening quote this week comes from Professor Tolkien's famous essay on fairy stories, and we're opening with it because we have this week an unexpected interruption into our journey into the East. We're going to spend some time at the last homely house. We're going to spend some time at Rivendell, situated at the same time as the last safe place west of the mountains, but also the perilous realm of fairy itself. And I chose that quote to emphasize as we move beyond the comfortable Baggins-ish world of the Shire and its immediate environs, trolls included. Trolls who have been shireized, can we say shireized, by the narrative voice of the Hobbit itself. As we move into Rivendell, as we move into fairy itself, I don't want to try to collapse fairy down. For all that we are reading this book, this trip through the Hobbit in the context of the Silmarillion, and we want, of course, to apply all of our great knowledge of the Elder Days, the First Age, and the Elves of Beleriand, and so on and so forth. For all that we want to apply that knowledge, I don't want to overlook, as we move into Rivendell itself, how important it is that Rivendell be fairy. And this is distinct. This is one of the ways in which the positioning of The Hobbit differs greatly from the positioning of The Lord of the Rings. I think I mentioned in last week's session that Tom Shippey in the Road to Middle-earth, I think it is, describes this sawtooth, jagged, rising, falling action pattern of Frodo's adventure into the East. And we see there these brief periods of adventure followed by periods of safety and comfort. And Rivendell is one such place of safety and comfort, but it is not that for Bilbo. And we're going to look at how exactly we interpret that as we move into tonight's session. Hello to Glorfin David. Hello to Galadra Becky. Thank you so much for joining me live this evening. This is going to be a fun one. We are going to get some poetry time. That's going to be great. And then we'll adjourn to the Green Dragon. We'll have our last call at the Green Dragon after the show is over to talk about some more elements of this very brief chapter. I believe that this is the second briefest chapter in the book. I should have done the numbers. I should have composed a spreadsheet, as I have been known to do in the past, really looking at the length of all of these chapters. But I think that this is the shortest, except for A Thief in the Night. Perhaps that is probably shorter. It's a very short chapter, but a very punchy one. This is going to be a really fun discussion that I'm sure we'll be able to get through because I only have like 6 slides to cover tonight. So it's going to be an absolute breeze. Let's begin by observing right here at the beginning of our reading the shift in tone, right? We have crossed the Trollshaws. We have emerged from that conflict. We are feeling simultaneously somewhat victorious in the sense that, as I said, of the encounter with the trolls. This will later be described as Bilbo's first successful adventure, though the degree to which that is true is up for some debate. We've recovered the stash of gold and provisions from the troll cave. We've recovered 2 very significant-looking swords, which I'm sure will be explained to us in just a few short pages. And now we're passing into the East, and the tone is going to immediately change. Let me share this slide, and we'll take a look at this opening passage. They did not sing or tell stories that day, even though the weather improved, nor the next day, nor the day after. They had begun to feel that danger was not far away on either side. They camped under the stars, and their horses had more to eat than they had, for there was plenty of grass, but there was not much in their bags, even with what they had got from the trolls. One morning they forded a river at a wide, shallow place full of the noise of stones and foam. The far bank was steep and slippery. When they got to the top of it, leading their ponies, they saw that the great mountains had marched down very near to them. Already they seemed only a day's easy journey from the feet of the nearest. Dark and drear it looked, though there were patches of sunlight on its brown sides, and behind its shoulders the tips of snow peaks gleamed. "Is that the mountain?" asked Bilbo in a solemn voice, looking at it with round eyes. He had never seen a thing that looked so big before. "Of course not," said Balin. "That is only the beginning of the Misty Mountains, and we have got to get through or over or under those somehow before we can come into wilder land beyond. It is a deal of a way even from the other side of them to the lonely mountain in the east where Smaug lies on our treasure." This is not going to be the most important or significant observation that we make tonight, but I do want to take a moment just to focus on that moment of characterization, that moment of Bilbo's awe, all solemn voice and round eyes. Much of his experience in this book is informed. It is narrated by the narrative voice. It is communicated very directly for the benefit of the juvenile audience of this book. It's to be expected. But this is a moment of genuinely great character acting. This is a moment of really great emotional positioning right there on the page. It communicates not just his feelings in the moment, but elicits our empathy and even our admiration for this poor little fellow in a very big world. The confrontation with this, the closest spur of the Misty Mountains, feeling like the culmination of some adventure, only to be told that not only is this not the mountain, this isn't even the biggest mountain they're going to have to deal with, and after they've dealt with these mountains, there is still a long journey to go to cross the east all the way to the Lonely Mountain itself. And this is part of what I was talking about at the beginning of today's session, this positioning of Rivendell and the process of coming to Rivendell and then the process of leaving Rivendell as being already somewhat otherworldly. We're kind of riding high coming out of the encounter with the trolls. We all survived. No one died. We got some food. We got some gold. We got some swords. This adventure is going great. And now, for reasons which aren't entirely clear, that mood has shifted. They're not singing. They're not telling stories. That was part of the adventure that we had as we were leaving the Shire, you'll recall. And the weather is better now than it was. We're not being caught in the same deluge that made fire the night before so impossible. And this continues for days. There is something oppressive happening. And this, I think, is part of the presence of fairy. This is one of these things which cannot be described. It is simply unlike us. It is simply unlike even the dwarves here, right? Who are much more accustomed to travel on these rude roads than Bilbo himself. But we're feeling already the presence of something that isn't completely comfortable, something that isn't completely familiar to us. The presence of the mountain here, and of course, Balin's, well, all at once, reassurance and also kind of stern rebuke, right? Really positions, if we are positioning this, for want of a better word, fellowship, as being somewhat isolated and vulnerable in this immense landscape, which we are. We're not calling out Bilbo right there at the beginning. We don't call out Bilbo until his attributed dialogue, right? All of the feelings that we're attributing to the company in that first extended paragraph are clearly being felt by everyone. Asterisk, we can probably exclude Gandalf from that, right? Gandalf is probably having different feelings all his own, but the dwarves are feeling this too. None of them are singing. None of them are telling stories. None of them are eating as much as their ponies are. And then the mountains draw near, and it only exacerbates this feeling of enormity before them. Though Balin, perhaps, with his kind of geographical account of what is immediately before them and then before them in a broader, kind of more comprehensive sense, we might speculate that Balin is perhaps more insulated from that feeling of fairy than the others, though we're not told that Balin is singing little songs all by himself or telling stories all of his own. Let's get to, let's cross into fairy itself, shall we? There seem to be no trees and no valleys and no hills to break the ground in front of them. Only one vast slope going slowly up and up to meet the feet of the nearest mountain, a wide land the colour of heather and crumbling rock, with patches and slashes of grass green and moss green showing where water might be. Morning passed. Afternoon came. But in all the silent waste there was no sign of any dwelling. They were growing anxious, for they saw now that the house might be hidden almost anywhere between them and the mountains. They came on unexpected valleys, narrow with steep sides that opened suddenly at their feet, and they looked down surprised to see trees below them and running water at the bottom. There were gullies that they could almost leap over, but very deep with waterfalls in them. There were dark ravines that one could neither jump over nor climb into. There were bogs, some of them green, pleasant places to look at, with flowers growing bright and tall. But a pony that walked there with a pack on its back would never have come out again. A perilous realm. Indeed. Treachery in the landscape itself. Indeed. And a kind of not specifically, explicitly magical kind of geography, but a geography that feels otherworldly, right? Certainly, there are places in the world where you can encounter, in the midst of what seems to be a flat plain or an inclined plain, perhaps, you can encounter a sudden ravine and looking down into it, see the tops of trees that have grown far below you. But that is not, I think, an everyday occurrence. That is not a common occurrence. This is actually inspired by, as Tolkien attests later, this is, I guess, I should be more careful here. I should be more painstaking here. Rivendell is often thought to have been inspired by Professor Tolkien's trip to Switzerland in, I believe, 1911. So he would have been, 19 when he undertook this trip. That is true, though in the letter where he recounts that story, he's actually talking about the leaving behind of Rivendell and the ascent into the Misty Mountains proper. But certainly we can see a kind of geographic thoroughfare here. We can see some commonality here. The unexpectedness of the geography, the treachery of the geography increases as we move through this very brief passage, right? We're given, first of all, this kind of picturesque view of what we're dealing with, just this plain in front of them, one vast slope going up and up to meet the feet of the nearest mountain. We get the coloration, we get the greens here, right? The color of heather and crumbling rock, patches and slashes of grass green, moss green, showing where water might be. This is not necessarily going to be hospitable land. It's not necessarily going to be land which is easy to cross, but it is at least understandable. It is comprehensible to the eyes and minds of the Hobbit and the dwarves as they are looking upon it. But then as they climb, they're starting to worry. They're starting to grow concerned that the house might be hidden almost anywhere between them and the mountains. How is that possible? How can a house be hidden on this vast plain? Because there are these unexpected valleys, there are these gullies, there are these ravines, and there are these bogs. And you see how we progress there, right? Unexpected valleys, narrow with steep sides, open suddenly at their feet. They look down surprised to see trees and running water at the bottom. I mean, that is possibly dangerous, possibly treacherous, particularly if you wind up traveling this landscape at night, but it's also kind of magical, right? It's also kind of cool to look down and to see this beautiful vista opening beneath you. Then there are gullies that you can almost leap over, but very deep with waterfalls in them. Well, that's not quite as cool as the valley, because the valley you can navigate. The gully, you can't even quite leap over it. And that might be a very narrow gully indeed by the standards of the dwarves, right? Like, I don't know what the clearing distance of a running dwarf would be, or the ponies, come to that. But it's a little darker, it's a little more treacherous. Then dark ravines that one could neither jump over nor climb into. These are little shards, little clefts in the rock that can't be, that can only exist to harm you if you should fail in your navigation of them. And then the bogs. Some of them green, pleasant places. The explicit treachery here, right? The explicit lure of fairy, that wonderful world that will tempt you into it and then corrupt you, consume you, transform you, spit you back out, having undergone great adventures, right? We're going to get a benevolent vision of fairy, but the fact that this vision of fairy is benevolent does not mean that it isn't fairy. It does not mean that it isn't magical, and it does not mean that it can be completely trusted. And we have to, at this point, contrast that with, of course, what we get of Rivendell in The Lord of the Rings, where it is this safe and stately place, as it should be. Because one of the things that has happened between here and there is that the perspective has shifted, the narrative perspective has shifted, that we are now just more familiar with elves. So we are more comfortable in this kind of fairy light, right? So we reposition fairy proper into Lothlorien in The Lord of the Rings, as we should. But we're going to encounter fairy in a couple of different ways as we move through the pages of The Hobbit, both here and in a different way in Mirkwood, and then in a different way again in the actual Hall of the Elven King, the Hall of the Woodland Realm there. So and I guess I should asterisk all of that too by saying this is all the more difficult for us here in 2025 because we've been living with the Jackson realization of Rivendell, a really great piece of visual design, a really great piece of art direction, but we've been living with that for 20 years now. So I have internalized what Rivendell looks like. And while it is an absolute, OSHA nightmare, there's no railings anywhere, the staircases aren't properly protected, a really dangerous place to live unless you are, somewhat supernaturally inclined. Though we have that sense of how Rivendell appears, we also have the great sense of peace there. And we understand it to be a place of learning and of lore, basically one gigantic library hidden away in a cleft in the rock. We don't usually gloss this, of course, but Rivendell, right? Rivendell is the direct English transliteration of Imladris. They just mean exactly the same thing. And it is if you think of something being riven, if you think of a rift, then you are getting a closer sense, I think, to what we get of Rivendell as a whole. I do think, again, as we move through this, I'm kind of planting my flag in the ground just occasionally, just to kind of give us markers to guide ourselves when we get to our discussion of the the Peter Jackson Hobbit trilogy, one of the things that I think is very successful is the way that we mediate Rivendell in that first movie. I really like the way that we position it in such a way as it is compatible with our understanding of Rivendell from The Lord of the Rings, but also feels new and magical. We get like the very treacherous descent down into it, right? We position it geographically, I think, more fully, more comprehensively. Though it's following on the heels of the bunny slide, and I mean, everything's better after the bunny slide, right? Let's take a look at. Is there anything else that I wanted to pull out? Oh, I did, of course, want to call out here the. I can't believe I didn't pull this on a slide. I should absolutely have pulled this on a slide. This is where we get the famous line wherein Bilbo notes that it smells like elves, and we never get an adequate explanation for what that means. Looking at John Ratcliffe's history of The Hobbit, I was startled to discover that in the original draft, Bilbo says that it feels like elves, which is so much more evocative, right? It's really leaning into this idea that this place feels otherworldly, that it feels supernatural, that it feels discontinuous with the very natural landscape that we covered up to, the Ford of Bruinen or wherever we happened to be. I think it's interesting to note the move there into something that is less evocative, less supernatural, and more mundane, right? Because the difference between it feels like elves, which is a very mysterious thing to say, and it smells like elves, is that smells like elves is a joke, or it can be played as a joke. It can be received as a joke. It's much more appropriate to that juvenile audience. Though, of course, that hasn't stopped generations of readers and scholars from speculating what exactly elves smell like. What is it in that moment that Bilbo is smelling? We're about to learn that there are fires burning down below, that there is smoke rising. We're about to learn that baking is taking place, the baking of bannocks, in fact. We might speculate that it is, the baking of lembas in some distant place, though I guess the Silmarillion confirms to us that only queens of the elves can keep and distribute lembas, and for reasons which we're not going to go into right now, there isn't a queen in Rivendell at this point, so probably not so much that, if that's even a part of the conception. I should note that in the book to my right here, in exploring J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit by Professor Corey Olsen has this idea, he draws this comparison between the scent that Bilbo is identifying here and a passage about Luthien Tinuviel, who is noted as, I think I have the quote here. Yes, in the Lay of Luthien, Luthien is noted as having the odor of immortal flowers in everlasting spring. Professor Olsen speculates that might be what elves smell like, and it certainly could be. I'm a little disinclined to pursue that reasoning the whole way to the end, because immortal flowers, the little white Nifredil, are associated with Luthien specifically. So Luthien has an association with flowers which may not extend to other elves. Also, let's remember that Luthien is, we're going to spend some time talking about the half-elves, right, as a phenomenon, as a kind of a core conceit as we're introduced to Elrond in just a moment. But of course, Luthien was half-elven as well, but the other way, as it were. Her father was an elf, but her mother was Melian of the Maiar. So she's an entirely different order of being, all of which is to say that perhaps Luthien didn't smell like a regular elf. And it's also possible that, smells like elves doesn't even necessarily mean, the scent of elves themselves, the physical corporeal forms of the elves, but rather something about, the homes and habitats of the elves. We just don't know. It remains an open question, and it's an open question we're going to spend no more time on because we have to talk about poetry. A brief word of warning. There is a word in this poem that I am going to say out loud, even though it is a word that has long become denuded of its original meaning and has been replaced with a meaning that is, a figurative use in hate speech. It is an absolute slur. And if that word bothers you, then please tune out for the next few minutes. I'm going to read it as I read the entire poem, but then I'm not, I think, going to refer to it again for the rest of this evening, the rest of this podcast. So forgive me, but my desire to be textually accurate and my absolute certainty that this word was being used in its original meaning to mean a bundle of firewood, it's a very, very unpleasant word that has been weaponized against far too many people. But thus this introduction, thus my reading of it nonetheless. Let's move into the Tra-la-la-lolly song, or as it is more formally known, I suppose, Oh, Where Are You? Oh, What Are You Doing? Excuse me, is the opening line, and that's taken as the title, but I think it's generally referred to as the Tra-la-la-lolly song. Let's get into it now. Oh, what are you doing, and where are you going? Your ponies need shoeing, the river is flowing, oh, tra-la-la-lolly, here down in the valley. Oh, what are you seeking, and where are you making? The faggots are reeking, the bannocks are baking, oh, trill-la-la-lolly, the valley is jolly, ha-ha! Oh, where are you going with beards all a-wagging? No knowing what brings Mr. Baggins and Balin and Dwalin down into the valley in June, ha-ha! Oh, will you be staying or will you be flying? Your ponies are straying, the daylight is dying. To fly would be folly, to stay would be jolly, and listen and hark till the end of the dark to our tune, ha-ha! Poetry time. This song is largely presented in a very unusual meter. It is a meter called amphibrachic dimeter, which means 2 sets of unstressed, stressed, unstressed syllables. That's 6 syllables in each line. No, yes, no, no, yes, no. Unstressed, stressed, unstressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed. What are you doing? And, oh, sorry, I missed that at the beginning. Oh, I missed that at the beginning, unstressed syllable that time around. Oh, what are you doing and where are you going, right? It's a very clean, very formal kind of construct. The meter is preserved through that first stanza. It breaks in the second with the intrusion of the haha at the end. This is doubled in the third stanza, which has the same 6 lines, right? We can see that the first 6 lines of the third stanza fit the same form as the first stanza and the first 6 lines of the second stanza. But in the second stanza, we add haha. In the third stanza, we add in June, haha. We add this pair of paired syllables, which I'm taking to be, iambic here, unstressed, stressed, these double syllables. Ha-ha, I'm putting the emphasis on the second syllable. In June, I'm putting the emphasis in June rather than in. And the last stanza, deceptively, actually obeys exactly the same structure as the third, but the last syllable of those last 2 lines before we really break, right? And listen then hark till the end of the dark to our tune, right? I think that what we're seeing right there is an enjambment of that final unstressed syllable onto the last line. So the line would be, and listen then hark till the end of the dark too, right? That's how we're building out the full amphibrachic 6 syllable line. It makes a complete sense there as we're reading it. If we just move that last, syllable of the line back to the end of the line where it should be, put till up there next to hark, put to up there next to dark, and those lines are exactly the same as the preceding lines. They have exactly the same structure. The breaking of the last stanza there, I think, also demonstrates the interesting rhyme scheme, which is A, B, A, B, C, C. So we have the first and third lines rhyme, the second and fourth lines rhyme, and then the fifth and sixth lines rhyme. But the burden of the rhyme, what's really interesting here, because of the meter, is that stressed penultimate syllable of each line, right? With the last syllable usually being repeated. So we're not observing here in that first stanza, for example, that ing rhymes with ing and ing rhymes with ing and li rhymes with li, though those are all in fact true and authentic rhymes. What we're noting is that doing rhymes with shoeing, going with flowing, seeking and reeking, making and baking. It wanders a little in that third stanza with wag and bag being rhymed, right? Wagging and baggins, wag and bag, a very solid rhyme. The actual last syllable, not quite a complete rhyme. And then dwalin and valley, not really keeping the rhyme, right? It's a slant rhyme, dwa and val. We can kind of see it. We're getting the same vowel sound almost happening there, but at least we're holding the meter. And that's exactly what we get at the end with those last, that last rhyme in the last stanza. Listen and hark till the end of the dark to our tune, right? We're still rhyming what would, under the normal structure of this poem, be that penultimate syllable, not the actual last syllable. The chat just updated, and I think that I suddenly got a surge of messages here from Galadriel that were perhaps sent over a greater span of time, but let's dig through them. Galadriel notes, I love how Tolkien uses active verbs to describe the landscape. It makes it come to life really well. The Great Martins had marched down very near to them. Absolutely, I love that too. It is, again, as I've said, I think in every episode of this series so far, Tolkien is oftentimes accused of including extremely long descriptions of landscape, and that simply isn't true. When he does describe the landscape, you're absolutely right. It is usually active, it is usually present, it is usually immediate. We are giving the natural world agency in a really interesting way, and we're doing so very briefly. It's usually just a sketch, or if we are repeating certain elements, as we saw with the ravines and the gullies and the clefts and the bogs, right? We're increasing with each turn, or we're making some kind of movement. It's not just a repetition of detail. It's a acceleration of detail or an intensification of detail. I'm glad Rebecca also notes. I always like the animated Hobbit rendition of this song. Is that the best song in the animated? Oh man, I really have to go back and watch the animated Hobbit. It's been, I'm going to say something very controversial now. It has been far too long since I have seen it. It has been a very, very long time since I have seen it. I do not care for it. I'm not a big fan. I didn't see it as a child, which I think is where so much affection for that particular era of animation comes from. It is not something that yeah, I was what, in my 30s probably before I ever saw that thing. So it doesn't have the same hold over me as it has over, I know, many, many Tolkien fans, particularly here in the US. But I really should go back and read it. We should, maybe after we're done with this move through the Hobbit, we could maybe do a, I don't know, take a Tuesday evening and do a live chat version of it, something like that. We can figure something like that out for sure. Let's one thing before we move on, actually, I'm so eager to get to Elrond, but I did want to call out one note here, because we've seen two poems already, right? We've had Chip the Glasses and Crack the Plates, which we didn't really talk about, but is broadly in a kind of strong meter that, although it frequently breaks in the middle of the line, we get a kind of, it's a kind of trochaic tetrameter, right? Chip the glasses and crack the plates. We're kind of getting that. What's really important is that we have this catalectic quality where we are stressing the first and last line of the syllable. We seem to be losing the last unstressed line, the last unstressed syllable, excuse me. So we are both beginning and ending each line of that poem with a strong stressed syllable. Smash the bottles and burn the corks, right? That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. We're beginning strong and ending strong. And the effect of this, though sometimes that leads us to blur a couple of syllables together right there in the middle of the line, right? Bottles and, right? Kind of running to the bot would be the stressed syllable there. Ulls and would kind of run together right there in the middle. It's kind of, the structure there is a little bit soft, unlike the Tra-la-la-lolly song. The structure there in Chip the Glasses is a little softer. It's a little more anarchic. It's a little more ramshackle. It's a little more rough and tumble, right? But what's important about that one is that stressed pair at the beginning and end of every single line. It gives it this very like accessible kind of rhythmic thumping kind of quality, which is absolutely appropriate to the song. That contrasts with the Misty Mountains song, which we discussed a couple of weeks ago in our first episode, really looking at this. Oh, actually, we didn't, did we? No, because I ran out of time. So I shuffled the discussion of the Misty Mountain song over to Last Call at the Green Dragon, the Patreon exclusive after show. So if you want to hear me talk about that poem, hey, here's a plug in the middle of the show for you. Head on over to patreon.com/nextword. Pledge your support there, and then you can get access to all of the downloads of the live after show. And if you're watching live and you do it real quickly, you'll be able to join me tonight for some further discussion on the subject of Rivendell. The point is this: Misty Mountains has this almost complete, almost perfect iambic tetrameter, right? It's 4 sets of paired syllables, unstressed, stressed syllables. Almost perfect. There are a couple moments where it varies just a little bit, but it's almost perfect. It's very strong. It's a very solid kind of composed piece of poetry. The point is this: for all of the superficial silliness of the elves' song here, and I'll have a word to say on that in just a moment, it is, once you look at it carefully, far more complex and challenging and metrically perfect than either of the dwarf songs that we have seen so far, right? The dwarf songs are rhythmic and blunt and perhaps a little clumsy. This is almost elusive in its cleverness, an elusiveness that is only aided by the enjambment of those 2 ultimate syllables right there toward the end of the poem. When There's also this element, you know what, we could take just a second to do this. There's also this element that unlike the Chip the Glasses song, which begins and ends with this stressed syllable on every single line, a consequence of the metrical meter, of the poetic meter of this song, the Tra-la-la-lolly song, is that we begin and end with an unstressed syllable. Our stressed syllables appear within these clustered sets here. So when I was learning poetry back in high school, I was told that ending a line of poetry with a stressed syllable is called the masculine meter. That is just the name for when you end and punch the end of every line of your poem. That is the masculine meter. Here we're seeing the opposite of that. What, you ask, is the opposite of the masculine meter? That's right. As I learned it in high school, it is the weak meter. Because I went to school in the late 18th century, it turns out. I know that feminine meter is, it's not much better, honestly, right? I know that feminine meter is also partly used. We're going to dispense with all of that. Let us not talk about masculine and feminine in those terms. Let us observe instead that the dwarf songs end rhythmically with this stressed beat, and the elf songs do not, until we get to those semi-comedic, semi-improvised, right? I'm inclined to read the ha-has, the injunes, as a kind of spontaneous outpouring of the singers who are gathered here, or as a kind of group response, right? Everyone raises their voice to sing those particular syllables. I'm not quite sure how to get it, but it does suggest that even here, for all of the superficial silliness of this song, it is much more complex. It is much more complete. It is much more slippery in the analysis. And it is much more elven, much more fairy. With all of that said then, let's get into Rivendell. And I've skipped ahead a slide. We'll come back. There we go. Let's get into Rivendell and Elrond. And so at last they all came to the last homely house and found its doors flung wide. Now, it is a strange thing, but things that are good to have and days that are good to spend are soon told about, and not much to listen to. While things that are uncomfortable, palpitating, and even gruesome may make a good tale, and take a deal of telling anyway. They stayed long in that good house, 14 days at least, and they found it hard to leave. Bilbo would gladly have stopped there forever and ever, even supposing a wish would have taken him right back to his hobbit hole without trouble. Yet there is little to tell about their stay. The master of the house was an elf friend, one of those people whose fathers came into the strange stories before the beginning of history, the wars of the evil goblins and the elves and the first man in the north. In those days of our tale, there were still some people who had both elves and heroes of the north for ancestors, and Elrond, the master of the house, was their chief. He was as noble and as fair in face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. He comes into many tales, but his part in the story of Bilbo's great adventure is only a small one, though important, as you will see, if we ever get to the end of it. His house was perfect, whether you liked food or sleep or work or storytelling or singing or just sitting and thinking best, or a pleasant mixture of them all. Evil things did not come into that valley. Rivendell, for all that it is positioned within the pages of The Hobbit as being a part of fairy, as being somewhat otherworldly, absolutely the best vacation destination in all of Middle-earth. I mean, I can't... Lothlorien, sure, like pretty amazing, but maybe you wouldn't feel as comfortable there, right? I don't know that I would feel comfortable settling down in Lothlorien to get to some work. I don't think that I would relax all that much if I were staying in Minas Tirith, right? Or even the Gardens of Ithilien after the war. I'm not sure that those places are quite as idyllically comfortable. And I say this, of course, as a nerd who really likes books. Actually, you know what? I'm going to asterisk that too and just note my favorite inclusion there, because it tells us so much about the narrative voice, because this is not a completely Bilbo-like intrusion into the narrative. This is the Bilbo that we will know in The Lord of the Rings, but it's not so much the Bilbo that we know now, right? The inclusion of work. His house was perfect whether you liked food or sleep. Okay, check and check. Bilbo, big fan of both. Or work or storytelling. It's so interesting there. Gladgebecky's asking, I always thought homely meant not beautiful, but Tolkien uses it as homey. Is it a British meaning, or is he just being creative there? No, it is absolutely I believe that the etymology is shared. I should have looked that up, but there is certainly an archaic British form that means, yes, homely meaning of the home. Absolutely. But yes, homely also excellent in use as meaning not beautiful, as you put it very very tactfully there, Galadriel Becky. Yes. So let's talk a little about let's talk a little about Elrond, I guess. Right, one of the most prominent figures in the entire legendarium, one of very few characters. Oh no, I'm going down a slippery slope. One of very few characters who appears in the Silmarillion and the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. Gandalf obviously appears in all three, though that's kind of softer. Bilbo isn't named in the Silmarillion. Sauron, I guess we can include. I need to give this some more thought. Durin the Deathless, I think, is named and yet doesn't technically. Well, I guess he appears in the Silmarillion, but he doesn't technically appear in any of the others. Thranduil would count. Thranduil is in all three. We're going to meet him, not by that name, but we're going to meet him later in this book. But there's no Saruman in The Hobbit, no Galadriel in The Hobbit, no, very few characters, actually, right? In the, oh, you know who we do get is Radagast. Radagast shows up. Gandalf mentions Radagast to Beorn, which means that he is, in fact, included in all three books, which is wild, honestly. It's so strange that Radagast makes the cut for all three texts and Saruman doesn't. In any case, that might be a conversation for the last call at the Green Dragon. I'm going to see if I can think up any more. Elrond is introduced to us in the sketch of the mythology, the earliest version of the Silmarillion, written in the late 1920s. He then recurs in very early versions of the Fall of Numenor, which are being composed around the same time as this part of The Hobbit. What's interesting about Elrond is that he has two very divergent fates in front of him. He's always conceived the son of Eärendil as being half-elven, right? Right from the jump, Tolkien identifies him as being half-elven. And the choice of the elves, the choice of the half-elves, I should say, is also present in the text right from the beginning. If you are born a half-elf, you can choose your fate. You can live as an elf, or you can live as a mortal man. And in different versions of the story, Elrond makes different choices. The first version, he is identified as an elf. He lives as an elf. But then in the second revision, he's identified as the first king of Numenor, right? He goes off and founds Numenor. Later, of course, Tolkien will have his cake and eat it too by introducing the character of Elros, Elrond's brother, who will take the human path, will take the path of man and become the first king of Numenor, and both versions of the character can exist simultaneously. So as he's writing The Hobbit, Tolkien is consciously borrowing the character's name from the story of Numenor. We know this. He just takes the name because good names are hard to come by, and he really likes it and he wants to use it. Because of the connection with that character, he makes this Elrond half-elven too. And let's remember that at this point, Tolkien is not trying to stitch The Hobbit to the story of Numenor, which feels like a completely different story at that point too, or the stories which form the core of the Silmarillion, right? The Children of Húrin, Beren and Luthien, and the Fall of Gondolin. He's trying to keep the Hobbit separate. He has no desire to knit them together. He's just cribbing a character that he wrote into a different story that probably no one is ever going to read. And that leaves us with a weird position, because it is not clear from the text that we are given here that Elrond is an elf. We know that he is many great things, right? We know that he is we get the description here, right? As fair in face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as the king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. But he's also described in that in the third paragraph there, as an elf friend. And the word elf friend, or the compound phrase elf friend, is traditionally used to refer to the man of the three great houses of Beleriand, right? Beren is an elf friend. Húrin is an elf friend. When we get to the Council of Elrond in The Lord of the Rings, Elrond will explicitly say to Frodo that if he accomplishes his goal, he will be counted among the elf friends of old, and name checks those men who I just referenced. And the fact that he's described here as an elf friend, one of those people whose fathers came into the strange stories before the beginning of history, the wars of the evil goblins and the elves and the first men in the north, right? The north there kind of gets an asterisk all its own, but we're clearly kind of pointing toward the stories of Beleriand and the First Age in Tolkien's imagination, though not textually, as I say. In those days of our tale, there are still some people who had both elves and heroes of the north for ancestors, and Elrond, the master of the house, was their chief, but it is not clear that Elrond half-elven, as he's presented to us here, chose the path of elves. And what's all the more striking is that this is not revised. This is not changed out in the second edition or the later editions of The Hobbit. it would be interesting to see what Tolkien would have done ultimately in his repositioning of the entire text. For all of that, though, we are assured a welcoming, wise host. Those qualities, right? As fair in face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. You'll notice how we're kind of doing the tour here. It is true to say that at this point, as Tolkien is writing The Hobbit and the Legendarium as a whole, he has no sense that Gandalf is not a man. There is no sense that as I said last week, I believe, that wizard is more than simply an occupation, right? That's not Gandalf's job. It's his kind of essential nature. And Tolkien later regretted using the word wizard for exactly that reason. It creates an odd kind of confusion in the mind of the reader. But we are positioning Elrond is exemplifying the best qualities of all these different kinds of person, of elf lord, of warrior, of wizard, and as king of dwarves. Not just a regular dwarf, right, but a king of dwarves. It's probable here that he is thinking of Durin the Deathless, who lived for almost 3,000 years, the longest lived of any of the dwarves. But then we pivot to as kind as summer. We come away from these particular embodied virtues and qualities and instead situate him in a kind of natural world that is not fairy here, but rather much more commonplace, much more organic, a kind of world that is familiar to Bilbo even from the Shire. I'm looking here and saying that I have 15 minutes left and 2 slides. Let's do this. This is going to be good. We might have some math here at the end of today's session as we talk a little about Durin's Day, but before we get to that, let's get to our moon letters, right? And our revelation of prophecy. I should note maybe before we get just to this, because I tagged it when we picked up the swords, that we're also going to present... Okay, I want to highlight this. Let me come back to my camera here. I hesitate before we get to the moon letters. Just to say this, that although I emphasize that Tolkien is not copying a particular version of Elrond from his pre-existing material, either from the stories of the First Age or the stories of the Second Age, as they will eventually become, although we want to be careful about preserving a distance between these texts, let's be clear that Tolkien is also simultaneously unfolding the history of his elder days, the history of the story, right? The fall of Gondolin is about to appear right there on the page in front of us, and he's also pulling in his constructed languages, right? We get Glamdring and Orcrist. We get these swords that are associated with the fall of Gondolin. We get Glamdring that belongs to Elrond's great-grandfather, right? We're not told that there in the text, but Elrond is descended from King Turgon of Gondolin. So we are... For all that this story is supposed to stand by itself, he is really going through the cupboards and just pulling down, or rather than cupboards, let's use bookshelves, right? He's going through his library and pulling books off of the shelf to include in the backstory of this text, partly, I think, just to augment and to increase that sense of the illusion of depth, right? The perception of depth behind this particular story. With all of that said, let's get to our moon letters at last. Moon letters are rune letters, but you cannot see them, said Elrond. Not when you look straight at them. They can only be seen when the moon shines behind them. And what is more, with the more cunning sort, it must be a moon of the same shape and season as the day when they were written. The dwarves invented them and wrote them with silver pens, as your friends could tell you. These must have been written on a midsummer's eve and a crescent moon, a long while ago. What do they say? Asked Gandalf and Thorin together, a bit vexed, perhaps, that even Elrond should have found this out first, though, really, there had not been a chance before, and there would not have been another until goodness knows when. Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks, read Elrond, and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's Day will shine upon the keyhole. So, we can't probably go, with the amount of time that I have left, too deeply into the convenience of this prophecy. And obviously, if you spend any time thinking about how The Hobbit functions as a story, this prophecy is incredibly striking, right? The two halves of this prophecy, not just the actual prophecy that we get, right? Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's Day will shine upon the keyhole. These are not instructions. in the sense that anyone could read them and access them and they would be applicable to anyone under any set of circumstances. They're only applicable to one very specific set of circumstances. They are, in that sense, prophetic. But there's also the prophetic quality of the moon letters, as that second paragraph assures us here, right? There hadn't been a chance for Gandalf or Thorin to see these moon letters before, and there would not have been another until goodness knows when. It has to be a midsummer's eve in a crescent moon. I don't know how rare those are. I spent more time trying to figure out the math of Durin's Day, as we'll get to in just a moment, and didn't spend as much time on the math of a recurring crescent moon on Midsummer's Eve. But let's be completely naive about the math of this, right? And just assume that maybe there is a crescent moon on Midsummer's Eve, right? If we think about the cycles of the moon, let's say a 28-day lunar cycle, let's say that means that once every 28 years, there is a sufficiently crescent moon on Midsummer's Eve. Well, that is what 28 years is 9,000 days, right? Let's say that there is one day out of every 9,000 when these moon letters would have become visible. And even then, only if you are looking at them at the right time, in the right way, only if you have the knowledge to read them, right? Who knows what would have happened if Bilbo had had these? He wouldn't have been able to read the runes, presumably. So we get this double prophetic, the realization of one prophecy and the revelation of another simultaneously in this passage, which is prompting us as readers to see this story as being something more than simply misadventure, right? This isn't just a fairy tale. There are, even at this point, even here in chapter 3, larger things moving under the surface. And they're comfortably fairy tale style things, right? There's no real provocation. There's no real challenge to our understanding of how we are supposed to read the text at this point. That will come, but we're not there yet. But there is still this idea that there are greater forces moving in the world. Tolkien and his publishers struggled for some time to figure out a way to represent the moon letters in the print edition of The Hobbit. The first thought, the best solution, arguably, would have been to watermark them into the page. So as you are holding your page flat against its brethren there in the book, it wouldn't have been revealed. But if you took that single solitary page and held it up to the light, you too would see the moon letters within the page, which is so cool, quite frankly. But watermarks are an expensive proposition at the best of times, and it wasn't at all clear that The Hobbit was going to be a big financial success. So Tolkien compromised and offered the much cheaper alternative of printing the moon letters on the back of the page in bold ink, so that when you held it up to the light, they would shine through, which would leave you with one blank page in the book, except for some backwards written runes, which I don't know how the average reader would have felt about that, but it is at least practical. It really it drives home, it emphasizes for us, I think, how exacting Tolkien was in the content of his books, but how practical he was when it came to the realities of print and publishing. He was absolutely a perfectionist and a romantic over those things which he could control. But then he also understood that he lived in the world. He also understood the realities of publishing. And though he would bemoan some of those realities in various letters collected in the bound volume of Tolkien's letters, he still understood the actual realities of publication. Unfortunately, what happens is that Allen and Unwin decide to use the map as the inside cover. So there is no, semi-transparent paper page which can be held up to the light, because we're dealing instead with the thicker, harder cover of the book. It couldn't, in practice, be held up. We have to settle for the version that's usually reprinted today. There are apparently poster versions of Thror's map, which are printed in the late 1970s by Allen and Unwin, which do have the moon letters reversed on the back so that they can be seen dimly through the poster paper. I have never seen them in real life, and I don't think that the photographs that I have seen really convey how it works. But if you've seen them in real life, please let me know. I would love to hear about them. I'd love to see one in real life, in all honesty. Okay, so the moon letters, prophecy. We are now, we're articulating our story here, right? We're kind of bending the path of our story towards something a little more grand. This has kind of stopped, with the addition of the prophecy, this has kind of stopped being about a simple quest for treasure. We now have the sense that there are greater forces moving with us. And that's only going to be compounded by our discovery of the importance of Durin's Day. Durin, said Thorin. He was the father of the fathers of the eldest race of dwarves, the Longbeards, and my first ancestor. I am in his heir, Can't find my Thorin voice properly. Then what is Durin's Day? Asked Elrond. "The first day of the dwarves' new year," said Thorin, "is, as all should know, the first day of the last moon of autumn and the threshold of winter. We still call it Durin's Day when the last moon of autumn and the sun are in the sky together. But this will not help us much, I fear, for it passes our skill in these days to guess when such a time will come again." "That remains to be seen," said Gandalf. "Is there any more writing?" "None to be seen by this moon," said Elrond, and he gave the map back to Thorin, and they went down to the water to see the elves dance and sing upon the Midsummer's Eve. The next morning was a midsummer's morning, as fair and fresh as could be dreamed, blue sky and never a cloud, and the sun dancing on the water. Now they rode away amid songs of farewell and good speed, with their hearts ready for more adventure, and with a knowledge of the road they must follow over the misty mountains to the land beyond. And so, Thorin's company passes through the realm of fairy. They complete their fairy tale adventure in Rivendell, and they experience exactly what Tolkien believes that we experience from fairy tales. We feel that same restoration and consolation, that healing of heart and hope. Remember how beaten down and depressed and fearful they are when they arrive in Rivendell, and look at how they leave, their hearts ready for more adventure. That is the magic of fairy tales. That is the magic, by extension, of fairy itself. We should talk, I've got just a few minutes left here, but we should talk a little about the complexity of Durin's Day, right? Because this is where the math gets really interesting. It is the first day of the last autumnal moon on the threshold of winter, and there are a couple of pieces of information which just kind of have to be asserted here in order for that to make sense. The first and most important detail is that if we're going to figure this out in real life, we have to note that Tolkien considers midwinter, the winter solstice on December 21st, to be the middle of winter, right? Midwinter ought to be, says Tolkien, the middle of winter, and not, as it's oftentimes regarded, particularly here in the US, the beginning of winter. I have often intuitively sided with Tolkien here. The middle of December seems too late to begin winter to me, just emotionally, right? Just intuitively, that seems to be incorrect. So in order to find the appropriate day here, right? In order to find the threshold of winter, which allows us to find the last moon of autumn on the threshold of winter, we have to count back from the midwinter solstice back to the fall equinox. The equinox is on September 22nd. That is 90 days, so counting 45 days back from December 21st in the real world, using our calendar, more on that in a moment, gets us to November 6th. A moon cycle begins with the new moon, not the full moon. So all we have to do is figure out, all we have to do to figure out Durin's Day, in the real world, is to track back from November 6th to the preceding new moon and then figure out the moonrise for that day, so we can be extremely precise. So for me here in Central Time, per the very fine website, timeanddate.com, the new moon preceding the beginning of winter will be 7:25 a.m. on October 21st, 2025. The moon will rise around 8 a.m. that morning. That's going to be a tiny little thin sliver of a crescent, but apparently it still counts. Thus, October 21st, 2025 will be Durin's Day. And as Galadriel Becky points out, my nephew and father's birthday. A very propitious day. That's excellent. Yes, good. So let's note here, though, that that's a great moment of sadness here, I think, as Thorin notes that the ability to accurately determine Durin's Day actually has eluded the dwarves. They have declined, right? As is true of all the great creatures of Middle-earth, they are in a long, slow process of declination. They're in a long, slow process of dwindling away, and they have lost the ability to correctly, astronomically determine Durin's Day, presumably because it's very hard to determine the exact new moon because you can't see it, right? It's demonstrably impossible to see. So by the time you see the light in the sky with the sun, which they still call Durin's Day, right, which is a kind of close enough example, it's as near as damn it, but it's not necessarily absolutely precise, because by the time you can see the light of the moon, you know for sure that it has passed. You know for sure that you are an hour or a day or 2 days past Durin's Day. That's the technical complexity that Thorin is presenting us with here, right? They have lost the ability to mathematically figure it out, so they have to do it by observation, and the problem with observation is that it was cloudy yesterday, so yesterday might have been Durin's Day, and we don't know for sure. We can't be absolutely precise. All of this, though, only applies to the real world, because for all that Tolkien, throughout the pages of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings too, uses dates which are familiar to us, September 22nd is Bilbo's birthday, is Frodo's birthday, as Glad Rebecca notes here in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry. September 22nd is your nephew and your father's birthday. An even stronger day, I dare say, than Durin's day. I was just talking about this and discussing the fact that is, what is it, Virgo cusping Libra. I don't know anything about astrology, so I don't really know what that means, but Bilbo and Frodo seem to be very fine gentlemen. So if there is anything to astrology, I'm sure that your father and your nephew are also very fine gentlemen. The problem is that though Tolkien uses dates which seem familiar to us, the calendar that he is using that underlies that date system is actually subtly, treacherously different from our own. The calendar of Shire Reckoning is not quite ours. So though he uses the same names for months, right? The Hobbits don't use those names. Those are translations for us for the benefit of the modern reader looking at this bound volume. Though he uses those months and gives us dates, numerical dates, they don't quite line up in the way that we would expect. In Shire Reckoning, there are 12 months every year, but they are all 30 days long. They are all exactly the same length. And the mathematicians among you will realize that means that we have some extra days kicking around. So we get 2 extra days in the middle of winter. We get Yule, right, which we discussed previously, though I don't completely remember when. Maybe in the last episode of There and Back Again, I spent just a moment talking about the importance of I did, in fact, that was where it was, talking about the importance of Yule. These 2 days that exist outside of the usual passage of months. It's as though we got to the 30th of December and the next day was the first day of Yule, and the next day was the second day of Yule, and then the next day was the first day of January, right? That's how Hobbits do it. But they also have a break right there in the middle of the year too. They have 3 or 4 days right over midsummer, which similarly exist outside of the monthly structure of the calendar. 3 or 4 because they have 4 days when there is a leap year. I think that is a very good system. I'm going to tell you, I think that's a really solid and practical system, and maybe we should consider adopting it in real life. All of that is to say that we get into trouble when we start figuring out dates in The Lord of the Rings and in The Hobbit. When we try and count the number of days between 2 dates that are given to us, we are sometimes off because they don't quite line up as they line up in our real world. Maybe I will just talk about calendars this week on the Sunday show. Maybe that'll be my main topic. I should possibly here in this show called Shire Reckoning address the calendar system known as Shire Reckoning. Wow, I am really all the way out. Glad Rebecca's asking, isn't that how the Hebrew calendar is? I honestly have no idea. I have never looked into the origins of that calendar. It's always been something that I've understood as different from our own. I've understood as treacherous. And so I've just kind of skipped over it, honestly. But I think that would be a really interesting research project. Maybe that will be the show for Sunday this week. Speaking of the Sunday show, it is 10 o'clock and I have to go because it's going to be last call at the Green Dragon in just 15 minutes or so. Let's consider what we're looking at next week. Next week, we cover Overhill and Underhill, chapter 4 of The Hobbit. We begin Bilbo's greatest adventure to date. We begin what is the greatest set piece of The Hobbit thus far. The following week, of course, we're going to discuss Riddles in the Dark, but next week, Into the Mountains, our first encounter with orcs as they are conceptualized in the pages of The Hobbit, as they are presented to us in the pages of The Hobbit. We're going to really see how this story operates when it kicks up into an actually adventurous tone, right? We've had the encounter with the trolls, which is dangerous, but also very carefully and very prosaically rendered, right? The trolls, because of the way that they are being positioned in terms of class, because of the way that they're being positioned in terms of their stupidity and a kind of abstracted genial malice, right? A kind of a weird bit of tonal arrangement where we end up with trolls that are dangerous, yes, but not too dangerous. Well, we're done with that as we move into the mountains and we confront the goblins and we get the opportunity to see Goblin song alongside our understanding of dwarf song and elf song. In fact, the positioning of the goblins vis-a-vis the dwarves is going to be particularly interesting in next week's reading. That will be August 12th, 9 p.m. Central Time here on Shire Reckoning. It has been an absolute pleasure. Glad Rebecca, Glorfin, David, thank you so much for joining me live tonight. I'm looking forward very much to discussing Chapter 4 next week and continuing our journey into the wild. Thanks so much for joining me. I will talk to you all again very soon. Until then, do head on over to patreon.com/nextword. Pledge your support. Follow along there for the links to all of these live things and help me continue to make more podcasts. I have some new technology arriving in the mail tomorrow, which is going to allow me to do some very interesting short form video, which I know that I've been promising for a long time, but every time I try and make some short form Tolkien related video, it all kind of falls apart. So do stay tuned also to the Instagram account and to the Blue Sky account. I am Shire Reckoning Pod in all the places where you would care to look for Shire Reckoning Pod. And if you go to look for Shire Reckoning Pod somewhere and you don't find me, let me know and I'll create an account there. I don't know. Do I need to be on TikTok? Do I really? We'll talk about all of that and more, I'm sure, next week. Thank you, Glad Rebecca. Thank you, Glorfin David. I will talk to you again next week. Until then, take care. Good night.